So I spent hours trawling the internet for information about what happens to them, trying to understand why we harm them, and wondering how we can evolve to living with them equally and in peace. One day I found the website for the World Peace Diet. I bought the book, and it resonated so deeply with me that I enrolled in the facilitator training program. Since that time, Will Tuttle's way of advocacy has been a major influence in my own work, as an activist, as a sanctuary director, as an educator, and even as a clinician. Along with the works of other abolitionist theorists, the World Peace Diet is compulsory reading for people attending Eden's educational programs. Will Tuttle's work in the books The World Peace Diet and Circles of Compassion, as well as his talks and tours, is expansive, intersectional, and comprehensive. It has a depth that is refreshing, one that unites our animal rights movement with the peace movement. At the heart of his work for justice is love, and we shouldn't be afraid to use the word. The animals need people who call uncompromisingly for us to stop using them, for their freedom from us. And Will Tuttle's voice is one of those voices. Ireland is a dark place for non-human animals, made even darker by the national species' pride taken in welfare reform that legalises injustice. In terms of suffering, inequality, and exploitation of non-human animals, Ireland punches way above its weight. It is a major world player in animal rights violations. It's the fourth largest exporter of beef in the world. 1 in 7 formula-fed babies worldwide are fed the milk of Irish cows. Our Department of Agriculture sells the myth of unsustainability to farmers, assuring them that this small island will feed the growing world population on the backs of farmed animals. We have such a large fishing industry that sentient individuals are counted only by their collective weight. Our contribution to the dark world of other animals is not confined to animal agriculture. Hunting is legal here, and Ireland is also the largest producer of thoroughbred horses in Europe. Anyone who has researched the use of animals for entertainment will be aware of how our use of them harms them. We have a large medical device manufacturing industry, and we're a major world player in the pharmaceutical industry. The cost, in terms of the number of animals tortured through vivisection, is enormous. Every non-human animal used by humans is an individual, capable of feeling, capable of suffering, just like us, and maybe worse. In terms of suffering, Ireland casts a very dark shadow in this world. But it is very important not to underestimate the power of light to overcome the dark. And tonight I am honoured to introduce one of the brightest lights in the animal's dark world. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Dr. Will Tuttle.
Right, the Animal Rights Society. Let's give him a big hand for all the work to put this together. Also, right. So, how many of you are familiar? Well, let me ask you this way: how many of you have made an effort to look behind the curtain of our culture's food system and see what's really going on to animals and what's happening in our food system? Some of you have done that, I think, probably. If you're here, some of you. How many of you don't think you want to do that? It sounds kind of scary to look what's really happening. Yeah. How many of you never raise your hands, no matter what? You know, it's one of those things where if we look to see what we're actually eating, it can be very disconcerting because we're we're brought up to think of ourselves as kind and loving and caring people who care about animals and the earth and so forth, and yet if we look deeply into our culture's food system, we realize that this is a system that is devastating animals and our earth, and really also our society and our health in many ways as well. And so we tend to not want to look too deeply there, and this, I think, is the key point. Just so I have a sense, how many of you have actually read the World Peace Diet? So I know so most of you haven't. I mean, well, a few of you have. Great, thanks. So, all right, what I'd like to do is go into these ideas a little bit more in depth for a little while, and then open it up to questions. The main idea underlying this whole talk is that all of us have been born into a culture that has a hidden practice and a set of attitudes that we're not really supposed to talk about. So if you found your way through the door and you're in here right now, in a sense, what we're doing together is breaking a certain taboo, and a taboo against really knowing the consequences of our food choices. This is something that's not discussed very much at all in the media and in the general conversation in our society, but I think there's no greater act of personal empowerment and of liberation for ourselves and really for others than to make an effort to understand the consequences and the ramifications of our routine mistreatment of the animals for food and clothing and other products and entertainment and research and this whole thing. So we'll focus mainly on food since that's where most of the animals are harmed, but the attitudes go through everything. And the basic idea underlying all this too is to understand our society, because I think at a deep level as human beings, we want to live a life of meaning and authenticity, and I think at some level we know that in order to do that, we have to make an effort to understand ourselves. There's an old saying over the temple at Delphi in Greece, it's Gnathi Suton, which means know thyself. This idea that if we want to live a life of meaning, we have to make an effort to understand ourselves. And what I've discovered actually in the research I've been doing for the last maybe 30 years is that to understand ourselves, we have to understand our culture. And because we're like sponges, we soak up whatever culture we're born into, and in many ways we're products of our society. And in order to understand our society and our culture, we have to understand the food system, because anthropologists understand that the primary way that any culture transmits its values from generation to generation is through rituals. And the primary ritual in any society are the meals that people share together. So when we gather around the table, from the time we're little tiny infants, and we're eating the food of whatever society we were raised in, we are basically not just eating food, we're eating attitudes, we're eating a whole way of looking at the world, and it goes in at a very deep level, sort of pre-consciously. This goes in at an extremely deep level. And what, again, we can see, if we look carefully at this, is that all of the attitudes that we're taking in as we're eating animal-based foods are attitudes that are not in our best interest. But the thing is, they're forced upon us. This is not something that anyone freely chooses. So this is really the great good news, in a sense. And I think I want to emphasize this at the very beginning, that the things I'm talking about here this evening, a lot of what I'm saying, you'll think, well, that doesn't sound like very good news to me, what we're doing to animals, what we're doing to the planet, and what we're doing to each other. But the message is really good news. The message is one of the possibility of a fantastically positive transformation that we can make in our society and in our own lives, and there's really nothing stopping us at all. I mean, the fact is that we've all been born and raised in a society where we've been, in a sense, forced to eat certain foods, animal-based foods, but all of us can make an effort to understand the consequences of that and bring our lives into alignment with our values and with what we feel is actually the right thing to do. And then we can also share these ideas with other people, and as people change what we're eating and understand the reason why, we can transform our society dramatically in an extremely positive direction. And so I think anyone who cares about human beings, cares about our children and ourselves and the possibility we have of the future, anyone who cares about animals and wildlife, anyone who cares about the whole environmental situation and the beauty of this beautiful planet, and cares about hungry people and having a healthy society. And everything is connected to this specific understanding of the power of our food choices. So the reason our food choices are so powerful, essentially, is that we have created, in fact, we were born into this, so it was created a long time ago, but basically we human beings have created a massive industrialized killing machine, essentially, that kills millions of animals every single day. And it does it routinely and relentlessly, and it's powered by one thing, right? This is the thing, it's powered by one thing. It's powered by people like you and me taking out our wallets and opening them up and voting, right? We take out our wallets and we vote for meat, dairy products, eggs, and fish, and so forth when we go to the restaurant and the supermarket. And so it's that voting, these are votes that always get counted. You know, sometimes I say, I don't know if the other votes get counted anymore, but these votes get counted, they get counted. And when I pay for these foods, then someone somewhere has to rape an animal and steal their baby and kill them and do all these things to keep, you know, millions of animals being bred and fed and killed. But the whole thing happens in a sense behind the curtain where we don't discuss it. It's sort of an invisible thing. We maybe see some animals here and there, but so many of them are raised in these stinking sheds where they never see the light of day until they're finally taken out and killed. And so this is something that I think, in a sense, since it's so vast, I think that's the thing. You know, we're talking about numbers that, you know, on a planetary scale, and really Ireland, England, Europe, United States, we're all essentially the largest meat-eating countries in the world, the industrialized nations that are growing a lot of meat, dairy products, and eggs, and consuming a lot of that. We are essentially part of this system that reaches its tentacles everywhere, you know, down into the very heart of the rainforest, into the oceans, and into, you can see, all, you know, the fields and land and towns and villages, and really also into our own psyches and into our own bodies. And this huge industrialized killing machine is devastating to everything it touches. So what I would like to just emphasize and share a little bit here this evening is to look at some of the outer ramifications of all of this, and then look at some of the inner ramifications, how this affects the outer world, like our earth, our society, and our health, and then also how it affects the inner landscape of our consciousness, because I think this is where it really gets very interesting. And so, essentially, from the point of view of the outer world, you know, this is something we can talk about for a long time. We do have, I unfortunately ran out of the World Peace Diet books. You know, over the last few years I've been giving lectures and they're just all sold. But I do still have some of these. This is me reading the entire book, and this is the World Peace Diet audiobook, and it's 13 and a half hours long. So don't worry, I won't keep you here 13 and a half hours. The amount of material I'd love to share with you is huge, really. I mean, it's a huge amount of information, but essentially it's relatively straightforward. It's not that difficult to understand. The problem environmentally with animal agriculture is that it's very inefficient. You know, it takes an enormous amount of land, of water, of petroleum, and of grain, essentially, that has to be grown, corn and soy and alfalfa and wheat and whatever, to feed these animals that we're eating to get meat, dairy products, and eggs. And so that causes a lot of problems globally and on every level in terms of water pollution, water depletion, air pollution, soil erosion, and also the causing of dead zones in the ocean from runoff, from herbicides, and especially from chemical fertilizers. And so we have those problems. We also have the devastating effects of cutting down rainforests. Right now in the Amazon, we're cutting down about an acre per second of Amazonian rainforest. And this is actually to grow soybeans. So it's the same thing. People taking out their wallets and paying for meat, dairy products, and eggs. So we're cutting down rainforest to grow soybeans, primarily to feed the factory farm cows, pigs, chickens, and fishes eat actually a lot of soy as well. And so this cutting down of rainforest, and essentially the meat that comes out of this operation, the soy, it's shipped everywhere, all over, to Europe and China and North America. And so this cutting down of rainforests is not only is destroying the lungs of our Earth, which is devastating, and also contributing to global climate stabilization, but it's also contributing enormously to another very serious problem, which is just the fact that we're causing species to go extinct because we're destroying the habitat. Right? When we cut down an acre per second of rainforest, we're not just cutting down trees, we're destroying the place where the animals live. So this is, according to biologists, we're losing about 100 to 200 species per day of other species, driven again by one thing, people eating meat, dairy products, and eggs. So to just sum it all, well, one more thing, and that is the overfishing of the oceans. Fishing has become also an industrialized activity. Every year since the late 1980s, the world fishing capacity has increased, and yet every year since the late 1980s, the pounds of fish that are caught has gone down because the fish are gone. So today, 2/3 of the fish, basically, the people in industrialized nations are eating are factory farmed. We're growing huge numbers of fish in these very toxic environments and feeding them to each other, to cows and pigs and to other fish. And the fish that we're catching, the problem with catching fish from the oceans is that the demand for fish is practically infinite because we're fishing and catching fish not just to eat directly ourselves, but to feed to cows and pigs and chickens. It's called enriching the feed. So scientists discovered a long time ago that if you enrich the feed of dairy cows, they'll give more milk, and they'll fatten up more quickly for meat, and the same thing is true, of course, with the other animals, chickens and pigs. And so when we don't realize that if we're eating cheese, we're actually eating some fish, and these animals, of course, concentrate toxins in their flesh thousands or even hundreds of thousands of times or even millions of times more in their flesh than in the water they're swimming in, and all of the toxins end up in the water. So the basic underlying understanding here really is if we want to do two things. If we want to reduce our chances of getting cancer and all kinds of diseases by eating environmental toxins, we should really eat low on the food chain, not eat dairy products and meat and fish and eggs and these foods because they concentrate toxins all the way up. The other thing is if we care all about our Earth, if we care all about wildlife, about having healthy oceans and rainforests and forests and aquifers and streams and oceans and rivers and climate, there's no greater gift we can give to the world and to future generations and really to ourselves than to move to a plant-based diet. This is the way to reduce our environmental footprint more than anything we do because animal agriculture is so inefficient and wasteful. Basically what animals do is they convert what would be healthy plant foods, fiber and carbohydrates and vitamins, minerals, and amino acids for proteins and fatty acids, all that, they convert it to four things: saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying animal protein, and huge amounts of sewage, as well as nitrous oxide and methane, which are far more powerful than carbon dioxide in stabilizing the climate and causing all, who knows what kind of problems. So the idea is to move to a plant-based diet if we care about health of our Earth, and even more importantly, I would say, not more important, but part of that is also important, is to, I would say, while you're at it, to move to an organic, as much as possible, plant-based diet, because pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides are all devastating to birds and fishes and butterflies and bees and other animals that we share the Earth with. And I would say, while you're at it, as much as possible, a vegan, organic, and as much as possible, unprocessed foods are really helpful too, because essentially if we're eating foods that have a lot of preservatives and chemicals and artificial flavors and all that stuff, it's not only hard on our ecosystem, but it goes through us and it all ends up back in the water and back in the fish and back in the dairy and everything else. So as much as we can, to just be conscious about what we're eating, what we're putting on our skin, what we're buying, cleaners, all these things, to minimize the amount of toxins, but also to minimize the amount of violence and abuse that we're inflicting on animals and ecosystems and wildlife by the way we're living, and not just listen to corporate advertising encouraging us to buy things just because it's in style or we think it tastes good, but to look at the impact that it actually has on other living beings, because essentially what we understand is what we put out comes back. If we're going to be living in a way where we're sowing seeds of violence, where we're spewing pollution and violence by our actions and by our behaviors, by what we're buying, what we're saying, and so forth, that eventually that's going to be coming back to us. So that's the environmental piece, I guess, in a nutshell. As far as the cultural part of this, we have to understand this, that animal agriculture, besides devastating this beautiful earth, it's also devastating to our society, to the health of our culture, because again, it's so wasteful. It takes huge amounts of resources. So even though we're growing enough food every year to feed roughly 11 billion people, the experts all agree on this, it's somewhere between 9, 10, 11, some people say as much as 12 billion people every year. We have about 7.5 billion. So we're growing more than enough food to feed all the human beings on this planet. Way more, plenty, right? But we keep hearing there's just not enough food. We have roughly 1 billion people, our own brothers and sisters, who are essentially starving to death. We see this happening, 20, 30,000 children every day die because they just can't get enough to eat. How is it possible that we human beings could be growing enough food to feed 11 billion people? We only have 7.5 billion people, and people are starving. This starvation and hunger and the food shortages that are caused by animal agriculture are the primary reason for conflict and war and terrorism. The problems that are really devastating our society, we have to understand that this is driven by animal agriculture. And the mechanism is very basic. I mean, you essentially have a situation where people who live in countries that are more industrialized and have relatively high-powered economies, it's not difficult for us to drive up the price of grain in the world market and feed it to our cows and pigs and chickens. They're getting plenty to eat, and they're eating, and then we're eating their flesh and secretions. But we've driven up the price of grain too high for people in the less industrialized nations of the world who don't have high-powered economies. They cannot now afford the grain because we're taking it all and feeding it to our animals. And so they're going hungry. They're actually starving. Plus, very often they're getting forced off of the land by the policies of put in place by large financial institutions and corporations and governments, as well as the IMF and the World Bank. And so we have this situation where people are going hungry, and that is the driving force behind violence and war. And when you have a mother who sees her little babies dying of hunger and starvation, and then really not far away, there are other people who are essentially taking so much land and water and grain, and feeding it to animals, and then eating all that as meat, dairy products, and eggs. This is going to cause this injustice. This basic injustice is going to cause conflict. And in addition to that, I think it's also important to just be aware of the fact that if I take out my wallet and I pay for meat, dairy products, and eggs, I'm paying someone somewhere to do work that I would never want to do, and that is, in a sense, forcing them to do things that bring out the worst in them. And so this is something I really don't like talking about, but I just have to say it just briefly, that myself, having visited stockyards and farms, factory farms and various types of farms, and slaughterhouses and these places, the animals in these places suffer terribly. I mean, it's just horrible to see what they go through, but the workers themselves, the workers who have to actually do nothing all day but electroshock animals. If you get hit by an electroshock product, it's not like getting a shock, it's like getting stabbed with a knife. It's just pure pain. And so we have workers that just do that. We have workers that kick animals, workers that impregnate animals against their will and rape racks, workers that just cut animals' throats. And if they're doing that, the workers basically have the highest rates of work-related injuries, and they also have very high rates of suicide and drug addiction and alcoholism and spousal abuse. They have what psychologists refer to as perpetrator-induced traumatic stress disorder. So if these workers are just doing these very violent things over and over again, they get numb and desensitized, and very often they go back and do terrible things to themselves or to people in their families and neighborhoods. And so we have to understand essentially what animal agriculture is, and what this whole way of living based on killing animals is. It creates webs of trauma. Trauma to the animals who are abused and terrified and in pain. Trauma to the workers who have to inflict all that pain. Trauma to the people in their neighborhoods and families. Trauma to the wildlife who have their habitats destroyed. trauma to hungry people who are starving because most of the grain we could feed, they could be fed easily, and now they're going hungry, they don't have anything to eat because we're taking the grain and feeding it to animals who would kill. Trauma really to future generations. And trauma in many ways ironically to ourselves, because the irony is that while people in the less industrialized nations, in the poorer countries, they can't even get enough to eat, people who live in cultures that eat a lot of meat have whole epidemics of diseases and a huge amount of suffering that comes from basically eating enormous amounts of grain that have been converted to the fat and cholesterol and animal protein that is really, in many ways, as I was saying, is acidifying, and it's also inflammatory. And so the conditions that we see filling up the hospitals and enriching the pharmaceutical industry, like diabetes and osteoporosis and obesity and liver disease, kidney disease, breast, prostate, and colon cancer, circulatory disease, and heart disease, and strokes, and autoimmune diseases of various kinds, and dementia. These are all definitively linked to diets that are high in meat, dairy products, and eggs. How many of you have heard of the new book that just came out by Dr. Michael Greger? It's called How Not to Die. Anybody heard of that? A few of you, yeah. Anyway, it's a book that's been a #1 Amazon, New York Times bestseller, and he basically he talks about, I think it's the 17 leading causes of death, and goes into what actually causes the 17 leading causes of death. And 16 out of the 17 are caused by people eating diets with a lot of meat, dairy products, and eggs. And the only one that's not out of the 17 is accidents, but everything else is caused by that. So again, to just understand that if we move toward eating a way of living that's kind and compassionate to animals and ecosystems and hungry people and workers, it's actually better for ourselves as well. So that leads into the third part, which is just our own health. Basically our own health. I just love it. I mean, I discovered the whole way of thinking and living of trying to minimize violence towards animals and move to a plant-based diet many years ago. And I haven't been to a doctor now in 40 years. There's just this wonderful sense of having the gift of a human body that doesn't require animals to suffer. We all have that gift. And so I have actually the whole book, a whole chapter in the World Peace Diet called The Intelligence of Human Physiology. It sort of looks at our physical body and try to understand, what are we supposed to eat? What are we designed to be eating? Look at our dentition, our saliva, the shape of our teeth, the shape of our jaw, the shape of our face, the shape of our whole digestive system, the pH of the digestive system. You can go on and on and on here, the circulatory system, all these things. But essentially, if we do that, we see that we can tolerate meat, dairy, and eggs. I mean, we can eat it, and we can do okay. I mean, people do, but we pay a big price. I mean, look at the fact that cows, for example, on dairies and our feedlots in general, they're very often pushed by not just eating grass, but eating grains, which are really not designed for it, and also eating animal foods. They're eating fish meal, and very often other types of meat that is ground up and put into their food. Do you think cows would normally eat that kind of stuff? Have you seen cows here in Ireland, kind of running across the field, jumping into a stream, trying to catch a fish? They're eating huge amounts of fish. Why? Why are they doing it? Is it because the farmers think, oh, my cow, I just want to give them some nice fish. I want to give them a good, well-balanced diet. No, it's very hard on their system. It causes a lot of problems. It pushes them unnaturally. It's toxic, basically, but it does boost the output. It does increase profits. And so we have to understand the only reason the cows are eating meat is because it's in the interest of their exploiters that they eat meat. That's why they're doing it. And that they have interests that are to them, as important to them as my interests are to me, and yet we're raised in a society where we're taught that we just harvest them, like they're just potatoes, and that they're just things that we use, like stacks of cement, we just buy and sell them on these commodities markets. This is devastating, not just to the animals, but to us, to our intelligence, to our capacity to make connections, to our empathy, to our sensitivity. We become numb, we become desensitized, and So this is the main thing to understand here is, there's a couple of key points, okay? One is that when we leave here and we go out into the world and we see people going into supermarkets and restaurants and buying the flesh of horribly abused animals and eating the secretions and dairy products and eggs from these animals, we have to remember that nobody's doing that out of a free choice. The only reason anyone does that is they're just doing it because they're following orders. They're following orders. For example, tomorrow morning people are sitting around the table at breakfast, having some coffee and orange juice and toast and jam and maybe some bacon or something, and someone's eating the bacon and they say, wow, oh, that bacon's pretty good. I wonder what she was like. Wonder what who was like. The pig, the pig that we're eating the pig. I was just wondering what she was like, how her life was, and so forth. We'd be looked at like, you're insane. You got to be kidding. You wouldn't eat. That's impossible, right? We've just broken the great taboo against knowing who you eat, right? But the idea is that we're taught from the time we're little infants to just stay shallow, to not look deeply, to not listen deeply, to not feel deeply, to not make the connection between what is our food. I mean, you would think our food would be the one thing we would really want to know what we're doing. You can't get nothing more important than knowing what we're eating. I mean, food is what makes this physical body, this vehicle that we have for our precious life. You would think we would want to really be very aware of what it is, right? And yet, I meet people all the time that say, oh, I'll eat anything. And I believe they really will eat anything. Sometimes I'm going to keep my distance, I think. I think if they realize, we're raised in a society, people eat food, so-called food, that's so toxic, it's so full of so many chemicals and so much misery. And what is it, what kind of a mind, how have we been wounded? See, that's the thing to understand here. All of us have been wounded by being raised in a society where we're forced not to make the connection with our food, to stay shallow, and not feel and think deeply, and not make connections. And of course, this works very well if you have a wealthy elite that wants to have people that just are incapable of actually making connections, questioning the official stories, like the official protein story, the official calcium story, the official human superiority story, and all the other official stories that allow us to dominate and exploit animals. And also who will believe the news, whatever they say on TV, who will believe all the advertisements and buy and be reliable consumers of goods. So the whole idea, I think, really with vegan living is to make connections, to look deeply and to feel deeply and to try to get a sense of what the consequences of actions are and to really take responsibility for the ripples that radiate out from my life into the world. This is a really beautiful thing to see that with every action, with every word, I'm sending out ripples into the web of relations that are really infinite. We're all interconnected. That's the underlying idea, the interconnectedness of all life. We're all manifestations of life, and we're connected. And so our welfare is connected. And so if we live in a way that we're, as much as we can, blessing others and being a force for healing and making ripples into the web that bring love and happiness and joy and freedom, then that's better for everyone, for others, and it's better for us. And if by actions are sending out ripples of terror and fear and despair and pain and misery and suffering, that's worse for everybody, including myself. And so we are depending on each other to create a world of peace and freedom, and all of us, animals, future generations, slaughterhouse workers, ecosystems, hungry people, we're all connected. So we're the ones, really, each one of us can make an effort to understand these ideas, and then we can decide how we're going to respond to these ideas, and we can bring our own life more and more into alignment with what our values are. So the mentality of disconnectedness, it's also a mentality of reductionism. Every meal, essentially, the subtext of every meal is, well, you're going to learn, we're going to teach you to look with eyes that when you see a being, you don't see a being, you see a thing, right? So we see cows, we see, oh, that's just it. It's an it, it's a thing. And it's a roast beef on the hoof, this kind of idea. And this is not only devastating to the poor cow who gets horribly mutilated and abused and stabbed and killed, it's devastating to us because now we have developed this capacity to look at other beings as things. And we create, we look at a whole forest and we just see board feet of lumber. We look at other human beings, we see resources that we can manipulate to our advantage. We create a whole economic system based on exploitation and competition where we all become, in many ways, numbers in a system that we, in many ways, create endless suffering for ourselves. And it's based on this underlying mentality of reducing other beings. Instead of seeing eyes of respect and eyes of mutual caring, we see how can I harm you for my benefit. And so animal agriculture essentially, again, is that mentality. It's also a mentality of privilege and elitism. I think we have to understand that too. The subtext of every meal also is that certain beings are inherently superior and other beings are inherently inferior, and it's just fine for the superior beings to dominate and exploit the inferior beings. So again, we say we want to create a society of equality, a society of justice, and yet every meal is injecting into us at a very deep level from infancy a mentality of entitlement and domination and exploitation, and it's fine to do that. And we just do it and we eat it. We actually eat it. We feed it to our children. We wonder why our children don't do a better job of creating a society of justice, just like we do. This is passed from generation to generation. And then there's more, but I'll just maybe mention one more, and that is that every meal essentially is also repressing what I refer to in the World Peace Diet as the sacred feminine, Sophia. Sophia was the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom, and I think on a deep level we all are aware that there's something within all of us, Sophia, the internal feminine wisdom that yearns to love and protect and care for life. A mother is a beautiful example who gives birth to this being, and there's this natural, beautiful, giving, caring quality that little baby is nothing but a lot of trouble, because she's just caring and loving and protecting and give her life to somehow bless this little being that's going to grow up. This kind of love, this kind of selfless, sacrificial, caring love is the foundation of a healthy family. You can remember as a little kid how as little children we depend on our mothers, on that kind of motherly love to care for us and protect us. That's the love is the foundation of a healthy family, healthy society, healthy communities and neighborhoods. Men are also capable of this love. We have this Sophia capacity, this loving and caring capacity. But when we are raised in a society where we're forced to eat meat, dairy products, and eggs, that every meal it just shuts it down. It just says, don't care. It's just an object. It's just a piece of meat. It's just a bacon. It's just, and so Sophia is repressed in all of us. And so when you have a whole society of people where they don't realize how deeply they've been wounded, how strongly Sophia's been suppressed, you have a whole society where corporations are free to just destroy the rainforest and destroy the oceans and invade our lives with advertising that targets our children to get them to buy products that are toxic so they can make money. Sophia would never stand for any of that. She would be rising up and saying, stop the destruction of this beautiful earth and the possibility of life for my children. So that's what I think we're seeing again with the vegan movement, is the resurrection of Sophia, of the fundamental wisdom of human beings to care for each other and for animals and for the whole web of life. And that is, I think, something that we can see growing more and more. I just basically, it's been great. I was able to participate with Roger actually, and sure, I don't know if any, probably the only one at the Brighton Veg Fest, but it was great to see. We have these, I guess 11 or 12,000 people, and I've been traveling now. So this is, I've seen this a lot around the whole planet. This questioning of eating animal foods is growing stronger and stronger and stronger. It's unstoppable. We're beginning to see that it's utterly obsolete. It's not, in the World Peace Diet, there's a chapter, the second chapter of the book goes into the history of all this, because people say, well, wait a minute, gosh, isn't this something we've done forever? And so it's just very briefly, it's important to just maybe emphasize this one thing. This is relatively recent. So when we look at animal agriculture and we realize that were born into a herding culture. Like we're living right now in a culture that's, at its living core, is organized around owning animals as property for food and other products. So that's called herding. And so if you go back to the, anthropologists try to figure out when this started, we can go back and we can say it started, it looks like in Iraq, about 10,000 years ago. People for the very first time started owning wild sheep as property, and then wild goats, and about 2,000 years later, wild cows. And so this was the last revolution that our culture ever experienced, in my opinion. I don't think there's been any revolution since then, because the Industrial Revolution and the communication revolution, they didn't change it. You can kill and eat more animals faster than ever, but that herding revolution changed things at a very deep level, because what it did essentially was it reduced animals who up until that point were respected as cohabitants of the earth with us, reduced them down to mere property. So they were reduced to things that we own as property. And the interesting thing is that they weren't just property, they were also wealth. And so the more cows or sheep or goats someone owned, the wealthier they were. And so very gradually, this was a very slow revolution. It took thousands of years, it took many, many, many generations. But gradually, starting 10,000 years ago, in the Eastern Mediterranean, a few things happened. One was there was an arising of a wealthy elite class. This wealthy elite class that was wealthy and elite and powerful for one reason: they owned the most livestock. Livestock were wealth. And so the very first word, actually, for, like, we have our word capitalism, the very first word that comes out of that, capita means in Latin means head. Head is in head of sheep and goats and cows. So these are the proto-capitalists that own sheep and goats and cows and as livestock. And they were wealthy, and then they invented two more institutions that we still have with us today. One was they would see another rich guy, a king, like we call him today, who had a lot of sheep and goats, and they would go and say, well, I'm going to take all those. So we had the very first kind of get-rich-quick scheme. And I think you've heard this, it probably sounds familiar. I think, when the rich one get richer, then they go to war. So this was it. They would attack and try to take all the livestock, and whoever lost the war, you didn't want to lose a war back then, because if you lost the war, not only did the livestock become the property of the victor, so now we have this, he's much even richer than before, but the people who lost the war now became slaves. So this is it. So we have the arising of war for the very first time on planet Earth because of animal agriculture. The very first word for war that we know of is the ancient Sanskrit word gavya, that literally means the desire for more cows. And then whoever lost the war became slaves, and so again, it was a brutal system. You're impregnating the animals as fast as you can, because the more babies they have, the richer you are. You're impregnating the female humans that you're enslaving as fast as you can, because the more slaves you get, the more powerful, the more workers. You're castrating the slaves so they don't do an uprising, all these kinds of things. So this massive violence towards human beings and towards animals has always gone together. And in the research I did on the world peace diet, it's very obvious that whatever we've done to animals, sooner or later we've done it to each other, whatever it is. And so we should really be very careful about what we do to animals, because we always end up doing it to other human beings. And maybe two more things that are part of that. The role model for young boys gradually became the role model of a hard, tough, disconnected male who is capable of violence towards rival herders, towards animals, towards women. And so that emerged. And then also women, their status was reduced, because instead of, again, being honored and respected for bringing forth new life, as the herding culture spread, men basically began to look at female animals as mere breeders. And again, it was a small step from looking at their animals as mere breeders to the women as mere breeders to try to, and the very first science actually was men trying to figure out how they could get more meat and more milk and more fur and so forth from the animals, so they would selectively breed them. That was really the rising of science. And so this eye of seeing women as mere objects to be used for babies and for their own pleasure sexually, and the sexual abuse of animals, because it's always been about the sexual abuse of animals from the very beginning. You couldn't have animal agriculture without sexually abusing female animals. That's the foundation of the whole thing. And so this whole system spread It's a very patriarchal, bellicose, warlike society. It spread from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Northern Mediterranean, up into Central Asia, to Europe, and over to the Americas, and it's been spreading, really, I think, ever since then, and through ConAgra, Cargill, through the large, fast food conglomerates like Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's, and through the chemical companies, the big agribusiness companies, the various governmental organizations, the IMF, the World Bank. I call the whole thing the military, industrial, medical, pharmaceutical, media complex, this vast complex. And we're born into that. We have to understand that it has the seeds of its own devastation, but that we can actually create something different. And that's the possibility that we have by understanding that as we move toward a plant-based way of living, as we embrace the ideals of veganism, which are compassion for animals and for each other and for the earth, and justice also for animals and each other and the earth, then we are actually not only sowing seeds of radiant health for ourselves and the environment, but the good news is that we can feed everyone on a fraction of the land. We can feed everyone, really. We can allow the forest to come back, the rainforest, the oceans, the rivers to heal and create habitat again for animals. We could ourselves be healthy. We could reduce the tremendous toll of illness and disease. We could create economies that are totally different. So imagining a vegan world is imagining a whole other world. And so I think this is the underlying idea, is to realize that we have an obsolete system. We were born into it. It has its own inertia. It's been going, I have no quarrel with the people 10,000 years ago, somewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean, thinking they need to have some sheep and goats to get along. But that is no reason for us to continue doing that today. I think my battery is... So I think the key here, essentially, is to understand that each one of us can be part of the healing of our planet. We can be part of the healing of our society, that the greatest gift we can give to the world is the gift of making an effort to understand the consequences of our choices of food, that our food is the deepest connection, really, with nature, with our culture, with the whole order, with animals, obviously, as well, and that if we make the change there and bring our values into that deep level of being, then we'll become actually part of the solution and no longer be part of the problem. And so I want to thank again all of you for making an effort to be here this evening, to question some of these very deeply embedded, very, in many ways, toxic behaviors and attitudes that have all been injected into us against our will, and then to build communities of kindness and compassion. And that's really the two. I'll just maybe close with this idea. Maybe last two ideas. The first idea is that the most important aspects, really, in all of this, really, are these two things. Number one, introspection. To take time in our lives to just stop for a minute and turn our attention within and look within and really feel into what kind of a life we want to live. What kind of an impression do we want to make on our world? Do we want to simply go along and be like everybody else? There's this wonderful saying, really, by Krishnamurti. He said, it's not a good idea to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And so this, we want to be well-adjusted. We want to eat what everybody's eating. We want to be like everybody else. But really, do we really want to do that? Or are we willing to step out and be a voice for another way of living that's based on kindness and love and caring and mercy and tenderness and gentleness? That's number one. Number two is community. The basic idea that the only reason anyone eats animal foods is because of the communities we're raised in. That's it. We eat animal foods because of the communities we're raised in. So we can create alternative communities. Like right now we have here for maybe 2 hours, we have this community where we're talking about a whole different way of living based on kindness and respect for other living beings. And we can go forth and we can build more communities. We have, Sandra Higgins has an Eden Sanctuary, which is a community right here, not far from here, where animals are treated with, I think I've lost the battery. Can you hear me if I don't use the microphone? Okay. Where animals are treated with kindness and respect. And this kind, there's online communities, there's meetup communities, all kinds of communities that we can create. I actually lived
at one point in my life, actually 2 points in my life, in vegan communities. And that's the only reason I was able to change. I was raised in a family that ate the usual huge amounts of meat, dairy products, and eggs, and it was only when I saw other people that were not doing that I said, oh, I guess I don't have to do that. So we can each be an example for other people and help each other. So introspection and understanding the power of community and creating alternative communities that are based on sustainability and kindness and caring and inclusion. Again, veganism is nothing to be proud of. It's just simply coming home to our true nature, looking with eyes that when we see beings, and trying as best we can to be inclusive in our way of living, in our love, not just for our friends, but for all human beings, and not just for human beings, but for all living beings, and not just for all living beings, but for the whole earth and the life here, and to have a sense of feeling of that. How many of you have noticed that the earth is beautiful? Beauty? I love that. The hands just shoot up. You live in Ireland, of course you know. But it's really, this earth is so beautiful, and not only is it beautiful, and it's heartbreakingly beautiful. I mean, just to really look carefully at flowers and clovers and streams and birds and animals and babies. I mean, just the beauty. How could we destroy that? How could we destroy the precious life that is celebrating here? Human beings are devastating everything right now because of animal agriculture in the outer world and because of the mentality injected into us by animal agriculture that keeps us hypnotized into a destructive mode. Animal agriculture from the very beginning was a war against animals and nature and each other. And we have no reason to continue it at all. It's absolutely counterproductive on every level. And the irony is when we talk about this to our friends and neighbors, instead of saying, all right, great, I'm going vegan, they usually go, oh, you're no fun, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. So we have to understand really two other things, which is number one, how to thrive as vegans in a not yet vegan world, and number two, how to be more effective as advocates. And I'll just say that this is a journey. It's a journey that really takes time. We learn, we grow, we mature in our understanding. So wherever you are on your path, that's great. Wherever you are is good. Just understand that we can always make progress wherever we are. Also, we can always move, and it's an adventure. It's an adventure of empowerment, of discovery, of awakening, of liberation. And essentially, I would say there's like three main stages. The first stage we come to, say wherever we're at, we go through the various stages, and we finally get to the point where we say, okay, now I'm going vegan. And so when we do that, that's the beginning vegan stage, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's a fantastic thing to do, but I think we have to realize two things. One is that once we go vegan, we shouldn't think that, okay, now I'm vegan, now I'm perfect. Nobody can say anything because I'm perfect. And, that's just in many ways the beginning of a much longer journey that's going to continue after that. And number two, to remember that at the beginning stage of veganism, we're still, we have a lot to learn, and so very often people, when we first go vegan, have a difficult time staying vegan. I've met a lot of people who were vegan for a while and then they went back again. So it's very important for us as vegan, if we're established vegans, to mentor people who are just learning or who are interested in that. But as new vegans, we have a lot to learn. It's, how to make food that's healthy, that's delicious, that's nutritious, and that we like, and so forth. And then also what to say to people when they challenge us, because that's going to happen. We're going to go to the doctor, and he's going to say, oh, you're a vegan? Oh, no, you're not going to get enough B12. Or we'll talk to our friends, and they'll say, oh, you're a vegan, but that's crazy. Don't you know we have these big canine teeth? We're designed to, tear through the flesh of crocodiles? I mean, come on. So we get all these, people say, oh, but what about plants? They have feelings too. We go, oh, I didn't think about that. Oh, no, what do I do? So we have to, really, make an effort to understand a little bit about the challenges that come and how do we respond in social situations to people, all these things, right? So that's the beginning stage of veganism is very difficult. There's a big learning curve. It's not easy, but fortunately there are people, brave souls that move through that and get to the second stage of veganism, and you would think, okay, great, the second stage must be fantastic. Actually, the second stage in some ways is worse than the first, because I call the second stage the stage of the angry vegan. So now we're at the point where we understand how to make good, delicious food and how to be healthy and how to thrive. We understand how to talk to people when they say, well, we should all be vegan, and I've got these big, carnivore steaks, and we understand, how to answer people, but we find we're angry a lot or we're outraged because we talk to people and they don't get it. They don't care. They say, well, you know what? I like bacon. It just tastes delicious. So what do whatever you want, but I'm free. I'm going to eat bacon. And we go around going, darn, don't they understand? And we have all these videos up on YouTube showing undercover footage of all the violence towards animals, and the only people that ever watch them are vegans. Because the people that are actually buying that stuff, they're not going to watch it. They say, I talk to people all the time. I say, would you like to know where your bacon comes from? They say, no. I want to enjoy my bacon. Go tell somebody else. So we say, but why don't people care? And then some of us really, we're so very sensitive. We take it all on ourselves. We think, gosh, there's millions of animals dying. I've got to stop the whole thing myself. How can I do it? And we work, and we feel like it's overwhelming. So this second stage, some people avoid that whole thing by what I refer to as stage 2B, which is basically I call the closet vegan. So in that stage, we just say, someone says, you're a vegan. Me? No, let me eat my carrots. Leave me alone. I don't want to talk about it. And I meet people, quite often they say, well, I'm a vegan, but I just never talk about it. I don't want to change anybody. So I think it's very important to get beyond stage 1 and 2 to stage 3, 4, 5, and I think I call those stages deep veganism. And I think it's really possible to get to stages in this life where we understand the bigger picture of our society, we understand the underlying woundedness that we've all endured by being raised here and by being forced to participate in these rituals of violence towards animals and other people. And even if we've gone vegan, it doesn't mean that we have totally healed from those wounds. We still have those wounds. We still can blame people and get angry and shame people and compete and all that. So we have to continue growing. But the point is, instead of having this kind of a dynamic where it's kind of like, well, I'm the vegan and I'm right, and you're not the vegan, you're wrong, I'm going to try to change you, we kind of bring it around like this, and we see that we're all on the same side, essentially. We've all been wounded, and if we're, wherever we are on the journey, what we can do is we can tell our story, we can share with people in a way that is respectful to them, and we can plant seeds. We can plant seeds effectively. I think the most effective way to plant the seeds of veganism really is to be living it ourselves, to live as deeply as we can a life of kindness and respect for animals and for human animals. We're all animals, right? So sometimes it's much easier to love the non-human animals than it is to love the human animals. So that's what we're called to do, and to have love and respect for each other and to model that at a deep level. So I think it's very important to do the inner work of getting in touch with the deeper levels of our own consciousness so that we can go through our life in a way that's kind and respectful to ourselves and to our loved ones. And if we're going to try to change people, to do it by living what veganism is as a lifestyle, and then sharing information in a way where we're allowing people to understand these ideas and move in that direction based on the sense that they can see there's another way of living, and that it's worthy. It's something where we're worthy of emulation, actually. And it's just a real honor, I think, to remember, to be born at this time. We're living in really critical times. So the final thing I want to say about this that's connected to it is to remember that essentially our life is not that long. Right? We're just here for a few decades. I heard this great interview the other day with a woman. She's the oldest living human being on the planet right now. She's 117 years old. They interviewed her and they said, so what's it like being 117 years old? She said, it doesn't seem that long. And I just love that because, even if we live, 10, 11 decades, we think that's a really long life, but really it flies by. And the day is coming, and it's inevitable for all of us when we're going to look back on our life and we're going to leave. And so we're just here. We're here for a short time. It's really short. I'm in my 60s already. I can't believe how fast. I remember just the other day I was in my 20s. So it goes by quickly. So the whole idea is to just understand that we've been given the gift of a human life, a gift of another day. Every day that we have, we don't have an endless number of days. We have a certain number of days. So each day is an opportunity for us to unfold what we want to unfold within ourselves, right? To bring to the earth, to bring to our life, to bring to our loved ones what we can that makes our life worth living. And I can tell you there's no greater gift, I don't think, than the gift of, as best we can, being a force for healing and love and caring and kindness towards other human beings, and especially towards animals who have no defense. I mean, they're being absolutely brutally treated. And I think when we dedicate our lives to that, then when we get to that last day, we will realize that we've been here for a precious time. We did our best to bring healing into our world. We've lived a life of meaning, and that is underlying everything the most we can do in our own unique way. And it's a cause for celebration, a cause for gratitude, and a cause also for solidarity, that we can connect with others that are doing the same thing, and that together we can transform our planet, and we have to. We understand this. With the technology we have today, we can't continue for another 10 or 20 years cutting down the rainforest at an acre per second and destroying the oceans the way we're doing. It's absolutely not possible anymore. We have to make this change if we're going to have a world for our children. And so if you're here and you're hearing this, then you're part, I think, of the team to help do that. So much love to you all. Thank you so much for the efforts you're making. I really appreciate it. Thank you.